Don't lose your way. Your mind free how to be as one.
Hey, what's going on YouTube? Or Storm here coming at you guys with another deck profile. I know I kind of feel like I've been a little deck profile overload. That's just because we did have a big major announcement from Konami in the recent time. We actually got a DDD structure deck release date tentatively scheduled for next year, as well as the announcement of two DDD imports being featured in the Mega Tens. Those being DDD Flame King Genghis and then DDD Alexander Gale King Alexander. Both these cards are being included in the Mega Tens. The only problem, unfortunately, with Alexander is we don't have a DD tuner to actually summon it, unfortunately. Lamia and Howl and Orthros are still firmly locked in the OCG, so there is really no effective way currently to summon it. And that's really unfortunate, and I've been on record saying I'm crossing my fingers that we get Howl and Lilith in the next before we get the structure deck, because Lamia basically just outclasses what those cards do, and it really would make sense from my point of view to just seeing the deck evolve to get Lamia and Howl, because the cards are basically having Lamia makes Howl irrelevant. But enough about that. So this is my fully decked out OCG list, DDD list. So we're gonna go ahead and get straight into it. So talk about some of the other cards. Dark Contract with Errors is a card I've kind of gone back and forth between main decking, but it's definitely something that should be in your side. If you don't know what it does, it is basically a continuous chainable trap stun. Provided you control a DD monster, it turns off all traps. This is really good against a lot of decks. A lot of decks run a lot. Obviously, card demise the thing. I don't know if it will be by the time we get this structure deck next January. Anything can happen, obviously, but this is definitely a card you need to keep in mind and probably have in your side deck. Then DD Savant Nikolai is an interesting card. It's it's cool, neat that it allows you to pendulum that to when it gets popped, it can set a pendulum scale and it can pump up your Blaze King Genghis, get you over a lot of annoying locks. The problem with this card is that the deck is not really built to pendulum. So we did get this card in the standard release of the Dark Illusion, though. So more DD cards are definitely not a bad thing. Orthros is a card that I've heard people tech in. It's a decent card because within the pendulum zone you can pop. You can pop a spell or trap in a DD or Dark Contract you control, which is pretty neat. It's sort of like a themed Archfiend-centric for the deck. And it's also level 4 tuner, which is, there's not a lot of pendulum tuners out there in Yu-Gi-Oh! Currently, so it's kind of neat. It's not a card I don't run it, but I've talked to some of my DDD players who've watched some of my deck profiles say, and so yeah. Then Lilith is a card I don't currently play in this list, but I know a lot of lists still do. It's sort of like another. It was really important in the old list because it was a level 4 you could loot back with Howl and then go into your Alexander. The thing with Lilith though is that she's with now that Thomas has been introduced, Thomas basically does the same thing that Lilith do, which is recycle your Kepler from the extra deck. And I'm not saying it's bad; it's just not entirely necessary. I've seen some OCG lists. Speaking of the OCG lists, or we'll get to that in a minute. Brio from a Different Dimension is something I've played in some lists, but Omega kind of does that for you already. You don't really need to recur banished resources more often than not, but it's definitely a neat card. I currently play it in my TCG version of the deck. Some of the OCG lists I have seen are completely turboing out the deck. They're running triple Thomas, multiple copies of Armageddon, Trade-In, and Pot of Desires. I feel like Trade-In is something I tested, and I haven't tested it since Tommy came out, but it's definitely something you can consider as well to turboing out the deck. I mean, but granted, I haven't had any much consistency issues with this build, but even losing the multiple copies of Upstart. But Pot of Desire is definitely not a bad card in your deck because, as you can see, you do play a lot of 3-ofs, and you're really never going to resolve all 3 of these anyways. You play 3 for consistency reasons. And the way the deck is built, it's a lot like Metal Foes. You can do a lot of your searching and then use Pot of Desires. So you can also, if you really want to play the card, you can also, DDDs can comfortably play a little over 40 cards. Now, with all the new support, I would say you can come with draw power. If you turbo out the deck, you can probably easily play 45 cards to mitigate the cost of this card. So it's definitely something to consider. So all that out of the way, let's go ahead and get to the deck profiles. First off, we have 3 copies of one of the main engines of the deck, which is DDD Oblivion King Abyss Ragnarok. So while this card is in the Pendulum Zone, if you special summon a DD monster, except during the damage step, you can target one DD monster in your graveyard. Any battle damage your opponent takes is halved the rest of this turn, and you special summon it and take 1,000 damage. This card is being in the Pendulum Zone is a lot of is pretty much intricate to a lot of your combos. You'll find if you're playing the deck properly, this should be setting in your Pendulum Zone more often than not to start your combos and get your deck going. So plus while it's on the field, when it's normal special summon, you can special summon a DDD monster from your grave, and then it can also attribute a DD monster and then banish a monster your opponent controls. It does target. That's one of the key. That's another thing about this card. It's also spot removal as well. I find myself using the effect a surprising amount to banish cards because this deck is a beat down heavy deck. It doesn't really always have ways to get over certain protected monsters. Then we have 2 copies of the new card we got in the Dark Illusions, DD Savant Thomas. Its pendulum effect, as we mentioned earlier, during your main phase allows you to add one face-up DD pendulum monster from your extra deck to your hand, and then but the main thing you use more often than not is its monster effect, which is, he says, you can target one DD card in your Pendulum Zone, destroy that card. If you do, special summon one level 8 DD monster deck. Defends position, but if it's a turn, its effect is negated, and any battle damage your opponent takes is half. If I'm not mistaken, that's just the full effect. And of course, both effects are hard once per turn. Thomas allows you to open up so many of the lockdown boards that can create. You basically just need a Swirl Slime Engrave, and then a special summon the Tommy, and then pop anything in the Pendulum Zone. And then you special summon another level 8 that's not Tommy from your deck. It opens up a lot of your rank 8 plays, your Harbinger, and it makes Cali you get access pretty dang easy. But overall, the card is pretty solid. I think 2 is a good number, but unless you're playing trade in, you can kind of max out on it if you so wish. Next up, we have 1 copy of DDD Rebel King Leonidas. I know a lot of the OCG lists don't play this card, but I always feel like this is kind of like a get out of jail free card if your contracts have to be up, because there will be times where your contracts, you don't have arc out and you're going to take a lot of burn damage. This card kind of like helps a lot with that. It deals with the problem, which is really nice. Basically, whenever you would take damage from a card effect, you can special summon it and you gain life equal to the damage. Plus, while it's on the field, it's on the field. It turns off all burn effect damage, which is really nice. It's also level 7, which means you can access your Siegfried. All you need is this and a Lamy, and you can easily access your Siegfried. Next up, we have 1 DDD Judgment King Armageddon. Armageddon has always been one of my favorite DDD monsters simply because it can't be popped by spell or trap effects, so it's immune to Regeki, which is that can lose to if it doesn't have its effective board set up. And it's just a really, I've always felt like it's one of a lot of my OTKs I do use this deck revolve around this card, basically Swirl Sliming it to the grave when I have Ragnarok in hand, Swirl Slime effect to get and then just looping it right back, and then bam, if you have that, a D-Arc, and a Ragnarok on the field that is exactly 8k damage per game, that OTK happens quite often, and that's one of the reasons I do still run this card. Then we have 3 copies of DD Savant Copernicus. I'm surprised a lot of people don't run Copernicus. You don't know what it does when it's in the Pendulum Zone. It is a solid scale 1, which is important because Galley and Kepler obviously change their scales. It says, before resolving a effect of a spell card that would inflict damage, you can negate that effect and destroy this card. This basically allows you, when it's in the Pendulum Zone, you can pop it and then to negate damage. The main thing you care about is its on-field effect. It says when it's normal or special summon, you can send one DD or Dark Contract from your deck to your graveyard. It is, of course, a hard once per turn. This opens up a lot of your combos and stuff do revolve around this card. Plus, it's a solid scale 1. It fixes one of the deck's biggest weaknesses, which is that if you do want to Pendulum Summon, you don't have consistent scales. I feel like I kind of like the cards. The same thing I like about Newton. Newton has the opposite effect, except it's when a trap effect would be inflicted when it's in the Pendulum Zone. But it's also level 7. It's a solid scale 10. The main thing that I like about it is you can simply chuck it to the graveyard to recycle any of your DD or Dark Contract cards in your graveyard and add them to your hand. I find a lot of times my opponents when I'm playing DDDs will instantly, the minute they see the gate hit the field, they'll space it rather than waiting for me to activate it and space it on activation. And then I'll just simply chuck my Newton, recycle it back to my hand, and activate it again. It's an important thing to remember if you are playing against DDDs. You want to wait till they activate their gate, their covenant, their Dark Contracts before then MSTing them in that window. Then we have 3 copies of DD Swirl Slime. Swirl Slime is one of the, initially when I read this card, I didn't think it was that good, but it's one of the most important combo pieces in the deck. So if it's in your hand, you can fusion summon one DD the fusion monster from your extra deck using monsters in your hand as fusion materials, including this card. But the main effect you care about is you can banish from the graveyard special summon one DDD monster from your hand. You can only use each effect once per turn. This card opens up so many of your just nutty combos with the deck, and a lot of times I find myself dumping it to graveyard with Copernicus rather than using it in hand. It's really nice. It's I find myself resolving it at least once or typically if I win, I've resolved this card at least once. Then we have 3 copies of Necro Slime. My initial build was only running 2, but I find 3 is really good because you are playing Allure of Darkness, you can chuck extra copies, but a lot of times I find that Necroslime is actually the one I end up resolving multiple times more than Swirl Slime. And basically, it's like a Miracle Fusion. When it's in the graveyard, you can fusion summon one DDD monster, fusion monster from your extra deck by banishing fusion material listed on it from your graveyard, including this card. So it's also a level 1, which if you really need to, you can exceed summon with it. But most of the time, I don't end up doing that. Then we have 3 copies of DD Lamia. So Lamia is a new level 1 tuner that really opens up a lot of the new plays. So what it does is it says if this card is in your hand or graveyard, you can send one DD or Dark Contract from your hand or face up on your side of the field to the graveyard except itself. Special summon it, but banish it when it leaves the field. So the main thing about this card is that it opens up your easy access to your Siegfried play, but it's also level 1, which means you can access, not only can you access Princess Sprite with the greatest of ease, it's also searchable by a myriad of cards, mostly broken boards that you can set up. The vaunted Siegfried, Crystal Wing, Titanic Galaxy fields involve losing this card multiple times in a turn. It's one of the most important pieces. I would never ever run less than 3. And of course, same thing goes for Kepler. So Kepler's main effect you care about is that whenever it's normal or special summon, you can either A, bounce a DDD or Dark Contract from your, I believe I have to read it again, basically, I think it's when it's normal and special summon, you can activate one of these effects. But the main thing you care about is it can actually search your dark contracts. A lot of times you need this. This is basically your Stratos, your Stratos, if you will. Whenever it's normal summon, it searches most of your pieces. It's kind of like, I would compare it more to like a Clayfort Scout because it gets your whole engine going. Then for these spells, we play 1/1 to search our Kepler and our Lamias from our deck. One Where though, this is an interesting tech card. If you don't know where this card came from, it's actually a common in Return to the Duelist, so it's not the easiest card to find. It's definitely a card if you are building DDDs or heck, even Blue Eyes. It's something you definitely need to look for. So it says, if you control a face-up level 1 monster, add one level 1 monster from your deck to your hand. During the end phase of this turn, take 2,000 damage if you did not normal summon the added monster or a card of the same name after activating this card. So 2,000 damage may seem pretty steep, but it does search your Lamias or your Keplers from your deck, and most of the time, if you go to end phase and you have your D-Arc out, you're going to gain the life points rather than take the damage because of the way it's worded. So the neat thing about this card is that it's not really a cost when you can end your turn with a D-Arc and a broken field, and not only that, you'll be at 10,000 life points. You're going to have, even if your opponent breaks your board, they're going to have a lot more trouble OTKing you than you might think. And then one Foolish Burial, you have a lot of cards you need in the graveyard. Foolish kind of just makes sense in the deck. 2 Allure of Darkness and 1 Upstart Goblin for a draw power. When Allure went to 2 and Upstart went to 1, I basically just replaced the Upstarts with Allure. Allure is absolutely fantastic in the deck. I know some DDD players don't like the card because it does require you to banish pieces in your hand, but I find the card is fantastic because just the volume of slimes and extra copies of blank cards that I play, I find it's amazing. Upstart is Upstart. A lot of my older builds are playing 3, but it's at 1, so I play it at 1. Then for the contracts, I play 3 Gate. Gate is basically your black whirlwind. During your main phase, you can activate it to add 1 DD monster from your deck to your hand. A lot of times, this is also like, if this stays up for more than 1 turn, you should probably have win the game. It's an absolutely amazing card. And of course, like all the other dark contracts, you take 1,000 damage during each standby phase. Then we have 2 copies of Swamp King. I know a lot of players only run 1, and I understand why. My theory is running 2 is that it's for consistency reasons. I don't always want to have to search it out, but when I do, but I feel like, especially if you're playing Cupidity, I kind of like having the 2. Basically, if you don't know what it does, it's basically a poly of Miracle Fusion in continuous form. During main phase, you can fusion summon 1 Feed monster from your extra deck using monsters from your hand or your side of the field as fusion materials. So you can also banish monsters from your graveyard as fusion materials. You can activate it once per turn. So the main thing about this card is it allows you to extend your fusion plays, allows you to go into your bigger fusions like Kaiser Ragnarok mainly, and that's one of the most important reasons for this card. Then we have 2 MSTs for removal. We also play a Dark Contract with the Witch. That's one of the reasons I play MST over Twin Twisters. Twin Twisters is not bad in the deck, but I find that I just don't like pitching a lot of my pieces most of the time. I want to keep my hand advantage, so it's one of the reasons. And I want to be able to have pieces for my Valkyrie disrupt my opponent's turn. Speaking of Valkyrie, we have 2 copies of Dark Witch. These have Dark Contract to the Witch. So first effect, you can send 1 DD or Dark Contract from your hand to the graveyard, then target 1 card in the field, destroy it, and then you can only activate that once per turn. And then all fiend-type monsters you control get 1,000 attack on your opponent's turn only. The great thing about this part of the effect is, say your opponent, let's just say hypothetically, you have a Genghis sitting on the field, and your opponent decides to, for some reason, let's just hypothetically say they have a Cosmo Forerunner for some reason out, and they attack into your Blaze King. Well, you can chain this during the damage step, and then your Blaze King will get a 3k instead of 2k, which is really good. And that's one of the main things. If you guys are unfamiliar, damage step, there's a lot of things you cannot do during damage step, and that's what makes this card so dang good. Now for the extra deck, we have 1 copy of Kaiser of Ragnarok. Kaiser Ragnarok is one of my favorite monsters in the extra deck. It does require 2 DDD monsters, so you do have to use, either your Ragnaroks or your Leonidas, or you can't use the other ones. The main thing about this card is, once per turn, when an attack is declared involving this card, you can target 1 other DD or Dark Contract you control. And if you do, equip 1 face-up monster your opponent controls except the monster this card is battling. Let's say hypothetically your opponent has a field full, hypothetically they have a Dark Destroyer and a Forerunner out. Well, what you can do with this card is attack into their Forerunner, then take their Dark Destroyer because Kaiser Ragnarok does not target, and it also gains attack equal to this effect. This card is it gets you over a lot of sticky situations, and worst comes to worst, it's a 3200 body, so it's an incredible card, and I would definitely play at least 1 copy in all of my DDD extra decks. Then we have 1 copy of DDD Cool King Beowulf. Beowulf has 2 really good effects. It uses 1 DDD monster plus 1 DD monster, which means you can make it with Swirl Slime and Necro Slime. Then it says, if a DD monster you control is attacks defensive monster, inflict piercing damage to your opponent. A lot of times with DDDs, they do have trouble getting over annoying floaty, defense position monsters, so if your opponent does decide to stack the table with defense position monsters, they're going to pay for it. The other effect is, once per turn, during your standby phase, you destroy all spells, trap cards, and each player's control and trap zone. So basically, every standby phase, if your contracts are about to burn you for game while this is out, you can nuke all your Dark Contracts while at the same time clearing all your opponent's back row. So basically, if your opponent decides to set a lot of spells and traps while this is out, it puts them on a clock where they have to think before they set all their cards. And then 2 copies of DDD Oracle King Geark. 2 is a good number because I never really find my need to make the 3rd one. I find the 2nd one comes up quite a bit more often. Basically, it has a very simple effect. Any effect that would inflict damage to you makes you gain that much life points instead. So that's one of the main important parts of this card, is that it allows you to reverse all the burn damage from the contracts and from your Ragnarok, etc. So it's one of the most important cards, and a lot of times you want to have this out as much as possible. So we have 2 copies of DDD Blade King Genghis. This card opens up most of the combos in the deck. So it's basically a wolf bark sort of. Whenever a DD monster is special summoned to your side of the field, except this card, you can target 1 DD monster in your graveyard, special summon that target, and then is this card destroyed by battle? If it's destroyed by an opponent's card effect, target 1 Dark Contract in your graveyard, add that target to your hand. So this card sets a lot of your combos going. It gets the whole board and engine going a lot of times, and this card is, there's a reason why a lot of us are really happy this card is coming in the 10s. Then for the synchros, we have 1 Omega. Omega allows you to recycle all your slimes. You banished a lot of cards in this deck, and Omega is, probably one of the better options to make level 8 synchros. Anyways, the 1 Siegfried is basically sort of like a, what's the card called? It's a Red Dragon Archfiend Abyss for DDDs. Basically, during either player's turn, it can negate 1 face-up spell and trap card to the next standby phase, and then when it's destroyed by battle, the card effect, you gain 1,000 life for each Dark Contract in your graveyard. This is basically, it's also level 8, which is important to note if you do want to exceed with it, but this card is absolutely amazing. It can being able to negate any trap during either player's turn is good. Plus, it can turn off your contracts so they don't burn you for game. Then 1 Crystal Wing. Crystal Wing is probably one of the best synchro monsters to come out in a decent length of time. The card is you can go into it usually with your Meteor Burst, your Alexander, and your Lamia, and being able to negate monster effects and beat over Cosmos ships for free basically is pretty nice. 1 copy of Alexander. Some of my older builds I ended up cutting it out, but I think now that I saw all the Crystal Wing combos. I saw this card is really, really important. It's an important tutor because it helps to get your engine going. Basically, if a DD monster is normal special summon, you can target one level 4 DD or lower DD monster in your graveyard, special summon it. So it allows you to loop back your Lamias, and then you can instantly go for your Crystal Wing. Then one copy of Odd Eye's Meteor Burst. Basically, it has two. The Majesty Fiend effect is actually not battle phase effects. It's not what you use it for. Usually, when you special summon this, you grab your Ragnarok from the Pendulum Zone, and then when your Ragnarok is special summoned to the field, you can then special summon another DDD monster from your graveyard. You kind of get the idea. It opens up a lot of the combos. And for the XYZs, we have one Felgrand. I still play Felgrand, even though Titanic Galaxy and Kali, you get good cards. There's a lot of situations where I find that my Felgrand first turn is a better play than Titanic Galaxy, especially if my opponent's playing something that like monster heavy. They win Titanic Galaxy because it's probably one of the best generic XYZs we've gotten in the past year, so it's absolutely sick, there's no if you can play it, there's no reason not to have it in your extra deck. Then we have one copy of Kali Yuga. Kali Yuga is an amazing card. Being able to basically turn off everything else when it hits the field and heavy storm the entire board for either player's turn is nothing short of amazing. And it's also 3,500 body, which is definitely, not anything to sneeze at. And the last XYZ in the extra deck is one copy of Sylvan Princess Sprite. This is an interesting card. I'm not sure. I was surprised this wasn't the YCS prize card, but nevertheless, hopefully that means we get it in Invasion of Venom. The main thing I love about this card is you can detach an Exceed material to excavate the top card of your deck. If a spell trap card added to your hand, otherwise send it to the graveyard. The main reason that I love this card is it's basically an XYZ that advances your game state. Similar to Lavalval, similar to King of the Feral Imps, similar to Gigant X, except it's a generic rank 1, which means it gives you controlled milling, which is something I've always had an issue with in mill decks. And not only that, you can it takes your Kepler out of attack mode, and it keeps your Lamia from getting banished, which is really, really important. So anyway, guys, always like to thank you guys for watching the video today. Really appreciate it when you guys watch my videos on Tuesday, Thursdays, and Fridays for more Yu-Gi-Oh content. And if you like what you saw in this video, please subscribe. So Orstorm, signing out.